Russia is preparing for a devastating Finnish invasion that could spark a war with all of NATO. How do we know? Massive military buildups on the border between Russia and Finland show us that Putin has far more than Ukraine on his mind. He wants to take on every country that used to be part of the Soviet Union, and he's ready to take on anybody who stands in his way. Multiple outlets are reporting on the Russian military buildup, with the Kyiv Independent offering the basics. It says that Russia's military buildup includes the drastic expansion of a military base close to the Russian city of Petrozavodsk. That city is just 100 miles away from the Finnish border. More worryingly is that the military base upgrades appear to be turning the location into a new military headquarters, capable of commanding tens of thousands of soldiers. That isn't an insignificant force. According to several Western military intelligence officials, it will be enough to form the backbone of what could evolve into a Russian force that takes on NATO. United 24 Media offers more details. It notes that Russia's military buildup seems to be taking place primarily in the Leningrad military district. That's worrying, not only for Finland but for the Baltic states of Latvia and Estonia, which also border the district. The buildup is part of Putin's wider plans to expand the Russian army to a staggering 1.5 million active members, the outlet says. Right now, Russia only has small brigades posted in the Leningrad military district. If Putin follows through on his plans, those tiny brigades could be expanded into full divisions, each containing around 10,000 soldiers. Examples of the buildup come from satellite imagery, according to United 24. Those photos reveal that Russia is building new storage facilities on the Finnish border, along with laying railway lines throughout the Leningrad military district. Why does that matter? Well, these two types of assets represent the start of Putin creating a logistical pipeline that will feed troops, equipment, and ammunition into an expanded base that is fast becoming a new threat that Finland and its NATO allies have to handle. Major Juha Kukala, who's a professor at Finland's National Defense University, outlines the threat. If you see them building new railheads or renovating old ones, it will be good to start paying attention, the major claims. When the troops are back from Ukraine, they will be looking over the border at a country they consider an adversary, adds the director of the Moscow Center for the Analysis of Strategies and Technologies, Ruslan Pukov. The logic of the last decade shows we're expecting some conflict with NATO. Therein lies a major problem. Finland is an obvious target for Putin. As the Wall Street Journal points out, the country was forced to surrender some of its territory to the Soviet Union back in 1940. Since then, Finland has attempted to avoid all direct confrontations with Russia so it doesn't raise the country's ire. Putin's Ukraine invasion changed all of that. It prompted Finland to join NATO and start reinforcing its border defenses. Why? Because it sees what Putin's game really is. Ukraine is just the start, in Finland's mind. Putin's endgame is to retake practically all territory that ever fell under the former Soviet yoke. Finland wasn't one of those territories, but the Soviets took land from the country, and Putin may be gearing up to finish the job. Worse yet are the mentions of NATO. While Putin plans to build a new Soviet empire, he also knows that he'll have to face off against the entirety of NATO to do it. The buildup on the Finnish border is just a small part of a much wider expansion of Russia's military that is happening even as Putin's forces lose hundreds of thousands of soldiers and tens of thousands of units of equipment in Ukraine. The message from Russia is simple. It doesn't matter how much we lose because we can keep on rebuilding. And that's exactly what Putin's forces are doing. United 24 points out that Russia's spending on defense has ballooned over the last few years. Before the Ukraine invasion, the country spent 3.6% of its gross domestic product, or GDP, on its defense. That number has since surged to 7%, with Russia's massive military spending having maxed out the country's arms production while contributing to the opening of new military plants. Production has skyrocketed in Russia. We can see that in Russia's focus on its flagship T-90M main battle tanks. In 2021, Russia was building around 40 of these tanks annually. Now, according to Western intelligence sources, it's building 300 per year. For most of the Ukraine war, analysts have focused on these numbers in the context of Russia's losses in Ukraine. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Russia has lost 10,728 tanks in the war as of April 29th. That works out at roughly 3,576 per year. Building 300 new T-90Ms annually is nowhere near enough to replace what Russia is losing in Ukraine. But it doesn't have to be. That seems to be the point. It appears that Putin may have relied so heavily on Russia's Soviet-era stockpiles in Ukraine because he's building up for something much bigger. The T-90Ms being built now aren't being sent into the current war, at least the majority of them are. They're being produced as Russia prepares for a new invasion against Finland that could spark a wider war with NATO. That's according to a senior Finnish military official. who claims that all of these tanks are remaining in Russia and will be deployed when Putin feels that he faces a threat large enough to justify their use. Artillery production is also on the rise, says the Wall Street Journal. Russia is expected to produce 20% more artillery cannons and munitions in 2025 than it did in 2024. Add that increase to the flow of artillery coming from North Korea. The nation sent at least 200 long-range artillery systems to Russia in February, and reports that Russia is running out of equipment may be inaccurate. It's running out of the older equipment it's been using in Ukraine. However, relying on those Soviet stockpiles has allowed Putin to rebuild and create modern equipment that he may soon point toward the rest of Europe. All signs point to a massive military buildup. The Russian military is reconstituting and growing at a faster rate than most analysts anticipated, says General Christopher Cavoli, who leads the US forces in Europe. Talking to the US Senate Committee in March, Cavoli said, "In fact, the Russian army, which has borne the brunt of combat, is today larger than it was at the beginning of the war. There are other signs that Russia's buildup on the Finnish border is part of a wider plan to take on Europe. Take the restructuring of how Russia organizes its forces as an example. In 2024, Putin decided to create several new districts in Russia. Each of these districts is tied to the defense of a major Russian city, such as Moscow or St. Petersburg. The reason for their creation, says the Wall Street Journal, is that Putin wants to concentrate Russia's forces in the west. That's what we're seeing in Finland. While the Leningrad military district isn't new, how Putin is using it has changed. What was once a district populated by a sparse number of units is now being prepared to host thousands of soldiers on the border of a country with which Putin has an axe to grind. Outside the Leningrad district, we're also seeing similar buildups. For instance, the Moscow military district has been integrating rail and road routes Russia's military uses with infrastructure in Belarus. That country served as a staging ground for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The fact that Putin is building a strong logistical network with Belarus, which also borders Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, shows us that while Finland may be the primary target in his sights, Putin is getting ready to battle plenty of other countries. All of this buildup comes down to the Russian military philosophy that we've seen at play throughout the Ukraine war. Size matters. General Sami Nurmi, who is Finland's deputy chief of staff, says as much when talking about what he sees on his country's border with Russia. No matter how they may try to innovate on a tactical or operational level, for the Russians, size matters. It always comes down to numbers. In Petrozavodsk, Putin is trying to make it clear just how superior Russia's numbers are compared to Finland. Beyond the tens of thousands of troops he's preparing to send to the military base just outside the city, he's also building new training grounds and barracks. Those add to the storage units and rail lines we mentioned earlier, combining to send a clear message to Finland. Russia is getting ready to demonstrate that size does really matter. But hold on a moment. For so much of the Ukraine war, we've heard that Russia is dealing with a manpower problem. It seems like a logical conclusion to make. Russia has lost over 900,000 soldiers to death, injury, or capture in Ukraine, if the country's figures are to be believed. That's not far away from Russia's total active army when Putin launched his invasion. The Institut Français de Relations Internationales, or IFRI, summed up what was believed to be Russia's problem in November 2024. It pointed out that Putin planned to build Russia's military to 1.5 million active members, meaning he'd have to add another 350,000 troops. However, IFRI also claimed that this cannot be accomplished without a new wave of mass mobilization. Maybe IFRI was wrong. The Wall Street Journal's report on the Finnish border buildup suggests that Putin may have found a way around the mass mobilization issue. It says that recent months have seen Russian military recruitment rise sharply, due in large part to the massive one-time signing bonuses Putin is offering recruits. In some cases, those bonuses rise as high as $20,000, more than double the $8,176 the average Russian household was earning at the end of 2024. Ika Koronen, who heads the Bank of Finland's Institute for Emerging Economics, says these one-time payments have gone up considerably, making them more than what many people would earn for an entire year otherwise. Money talks in Russia. And the amount of it that Putin is throwing around seems to be solving his manpower problems. That's according to US estimates, which suggest that Putin is currently signing up 30,000 soldiers per month to his military. That's 5,000 more per month than the 25,000 he was getting in the summer of 2024. It may be even worse than that from the Finnish perspective. The Wall Street Journal says that some Eastern European sources suggest that Russia is signing up new soldiers at a rate of 40,000 per month. In some quarters of Russia, being part of the military is seen as also becoming part of the country's new elite. Putin is reinforcing that image, not only with the signing bonuses, but by offering massive benefits to veterans and their families. Many soldiers who come back from Ukraine also end up sitting on city councils or becoming members of Russia's parliament. So these soldiers get a massive cash windfall simply for signing up, and have the prospect of a bright future if they make it out of Ukraine. Is all of this sustainable for Russia? Perhaps not. Much has been made of the economic woes the Ukraine war has caused for the country as it struggles under the weight of Western sanctions. But for now, Finland is having to watch as Russia evolves and grows its military to the point where it's able to rotate troops in Ukraine while building up on the country's border. And it's not just Finland that needs to worry. Russia's intelligent military buildup has become so severe a problem that NATO can't ignore it. Why? Well, there are several reasons. For instance, Russia is building 20% more artillery and ammunition at a time when it's improving its kill chain in Ukraine. A kill chain refers to how quickly an army can move from locating a target to firing on that target. According to an April 28th Business Insider report, Russia has refined its artillery kill chain to the point where it's far faster and more effective in Ukraine. That should worry Finland and NATO. It shows us that Russia is learning lessons from its earlier failures in Ukraine. Should Putin turn his attention to Finland in the aftermath of Ukraine, it, along with NATO, will be dealing with a far more experienced and efficient Russian army than either might have expected. These efficiency improvements are happening as the Russian military is growing. The national interest says Russia is replacing the troops it's losing in Ukraine on a near one-to-one basis. Again, that's concerning for NATO and Finland. Russia is proving itself capable of maintaining its military numbers while making moves to grow them even further. If NATO had hoped it would be fighting a weakened Russia if Putin plans to invade Finland, it may be sorely mistaken. Russia may be just as strong as it ever was. Then there are the warnings. Russia isn't engaging in its military buildup in Finland and elsewhere for no reason. It's preparing for multiple scenarios, one of which is a war with NATO at some point during the next decade. That's according to Andrei Belyusov, who's Russia's defense minister. Speaking about a possible confrontation with NATO, Belyusov said, "Preparing for war is indicated by the decisions that were made at the North Atlantic Summit held in July of this year." The Russian defense minister is referring to decisions made in the summer of 2024. This is also reflected in the doctrinal documents of the United States and other NATO countries. In other words, Russia sees NATO as a clear threat. That means it sees Finland as a threat. After all, the country that has so long attempted to avoid any sort of conflict with Russia joined the Cooperative Defense Alliance in the wake of Putin's Ukraine invasion. Now, with Russia's buildup on its borders, it's potentially about to experience the consequences of that decision. Which brings us to a question. What is Finland doing to prepare itself as Russia builds up? As much as it can, but it may not be enough. As Russia expands its forces on the Finnish border, Finland is responding by strengthening its military in as many ways as possible. We see that most obviously in Finland's defense spending. The country has pledged to raise spending to 3% of its GDP by 2029, which is 1% higher than the 2% NATO recommendation. That's impressive. However, it's still only around half of Russia's military spending as it relates to GDP. And in pure dollar figures, the extra $4 billion Finland intends to spend by 2029 is dwarfed by Russia's annual spending of $145.9 billion. Still, it's something. Complementing this spending are several actions Finland hopes will prepare it for war. The country has built thousands of civilian defense shelters, with enough now in place to house all 600,000 residents of the capital city of Helsinki. These shelters are underground and will be used for protection in the event of a nuclear war. Finland even orders its citizens to ensure these shelters remain stocked with grab boxes of supplies that include bottled water, gasoline, and non-perishable foods. The concept of a future war with Russia is being baked into the country. Back on the direct military front, Finland is also making moves to reinforce its 857-mile border with Russia. One of those moves is an attempt to exit an international treaty that bans the use of anti-personnel mines, of which Finland is one of the 165 signatories. The announcement of these plans drew backlash from anti-landmine campaigners. However, Finland will see it as a necessary preparation for what Russia has planned. The country's Prime Minister, Petteri Orpo, practically said as much when announcing the plans. He says exiting the landmine treaty gives his country the possibility to prepare for the changes in the security environment in a more versatile way. Translation: Finland wants to use landmines to deter Russian forces from crossing the border. Elsewhere on the border, Finland has increased patrols. Soldiers on cross-country skis are a regular sight, as are drones and helicopters patrolling the border. New fences are being built, which extend to 13 feet high in some places, and they're being topped with barbed wire that will shred through anybody foolish enough to cross them. Add 24-hour electronic surveillance measures into the mix, and it's clear that Finland is doing everything it can to ensure it's as alert as possible to a future Russian invasion. But will it be enough? Even with all of the increased spending and border defenses, Finland falls a long way behind Russia on the military power front. Its military only has 24,000 active personnel. Granted, Finland also has 870,000 reserves upon which it can call in the event of war. However, it's not getting those reserves quite ready yet. Remember that Russia's buildup on the border is strong enough that it will soon lead to tens of thousands of Russian soldiers being stationed in the Leningrad military district. The size matters approach comes into play here, as what could be considered a small Russian force is enough to match Finland's active force. As Putin continues to tempt more people into his army with promises of massive paydays and future prestige, the gap will only grow wider. Anywhere else you look, Russia has a clear advantage. It has over 41,000 more aerial assets than Finland. Russia has 5,750 tanks to Finland's 200, more than 10 times the number of armored vehicles. Finland loses on artillery stockpiles by thousands, and its navy, though around half the size of Russia's in terms of number of assets, lacks strong vessels. Russia has an aircraft carrier, over 60 submarines, and 10 destroyers. Finland has none in each category. When it comes to a straight fight, Russia should defeat Finland easily, but it won't be a straight fight. Finland joined NATO specifically to prepare for this type of situation. As Putin makes all of the moves that suggest he's preparing for an invasion, Finland can only hope that its NATO membership, combined with its efforts to prepare, will be enough to repel the Russian advance. But what do you think about Russia's military border buildup near Finland? Is it a sign that Putin intends to invade once he's done in Ukraine? What else can Finland do to prevent that invasion from happening? Share your thoughts with us in the comments, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more commentary on Russia's expansionist goals in Europe.